All right. With no further ado, folks, thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to Yeshua Ventura.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming here. I just kind of like to take a moment, as I'm sure you've been having your days and running around and doing all the different things and trying to maintain focus on Zoom, which I'm sure all of us are a little fatigued with. But thank you so much for coming and wanting to participate. So I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath, and I would like you to think about these next few statements. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. I came across this like phrase a few years ago, and I just thought about it and like what a perfect way to think about like peer navigation or peer work, right? It's like we just start where we are, we use what we have, right? We have to use the resources that we're able to connect with, and then do what you can. And that is the best part, I think, for me, because the idea of like doing what you can is kind of connected to like for me like doing your best, but that is also really difference, right? Because it changes every day. My best can be like doing one thing one day, and then and this next day could be something totally different. But it's just that I'm trying to do my best, and for me, like working with peers, this is a big part. Is like making sure we're meeting with them where they are, and really emphasizing and teaching and modeling how to use what we have, and then being able to feel grounded enough and in our agency to do what we can. So I welcome you to Peer Navigating HIV in Washington State. Um, my name is Yehoshua Ventura. My pronouns are he, him, el. I am the bilingual peer navigation consultant as part of the HIV Community Services within the Office of Infectious Disease at the Washington State Department of Health. Whew, there's a mouthful. I am really excited to be here today and do this presentation because I just kind of like want to like say like, hey, I'm a peer, you're a peer, we can do amazing things. And I'm going to share with you this journey of how I got to this position. And just thinking about like life change, right? And the things that we're going through as peers and working with our own peer clients um, and what journey that puts us on, because I feel like most of us come to this job in a way that, you know, maybe wasn't very expected, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in this position where you're interacting and being present for other human beings in a way that you've never been before. And that is really special and that is super magical. And we need to make sure that we're working on an awareness around how to keep ourselves healthy through that work. But also to be able to acknowledge that we are in a position of leadership within this relationship, but also being able to be equal in a way to your peer as well, so that you can share. We can, you know, we have the power or the magic of being able to share and using that share to help other people. And I think that when you start doing this work, right, we start thinking about like, you know, we start having to check in with ourselves around the things that we're doing and how we view ourselves, how we view the things that we're seeing in our peer clients, and how we may be having the same things in our own lives. And like, how are we dealing with that? Like, am I judging myself? Am I being rigid around certain things? And then like, does that, you know, go into, is that being triggered when I'm working with my client? You know, the idea of trigger and trauma informed care, and all we're hearing is trauma informed care all over the place, right? It's like everyone's talking about trauma informed care and now equity work, thank God. And so and I'm gonna, hopefully it's okay, but I'm gonna be using God in my lecture a couple times. I hope that doesn't bother anybody, but just trigger warning. And so I wanted to do this presentation in a way that was kind of like telling you what's going on, but at the same time, like, again, like from a peer experience. I think that's the cool part about this, is that I'm presenting to peers. So I'm not going to have to describe a lot of things, and you're already going to know that kind of stuff. So for this presentation is going to be a bit different than what I would normally give. So I'm going to start with my journey. And my journey starts on the East Coast. I hail from the East. And I grew up in an abusive home for my middle, kind of like from like 9 to 17. But I had a whole bunch of things that happened to me on the East Coast, and they were things like when my mom was pregnant with me, she had major depression and anxiety because my father was in El Salvador and she was by herself. Afterwards, because of the stuff that was going on with them, my mom ended up abducting me at the age of 1 and going to Connecticut. And then bounced back and forth between Connecticut and New York, Great Neck, and until my mom met my stepfather, and she married him, and we moved to Connecticut, and he is an alcoholic and was an abusive home life that I was in. In the interim, I went down to El Salvador several times as a child, but the last time that I was there, I experienced a huge amount of wartime trauma. Like I saw dead bodies, I experienced my aunt getting kidnapped by the guerrillas, like, and all of the things. And as a 8-year-old child, and having to like deal with all of that, and also hearing machine guns and the town next door was being wartime trauma. Again, trigger warning, I'm gonna share stuff. And then like, as I'm growing up, it's like all of a sudden I'm realizing, actually it was like 6 that I realized it, but then like in early adolescence, like starting to really connect with this like deep fear and rage around the fact that I didn't like girls. And then like I was supposed to like girls, and then like especially as a Latino and being like the only son to my mom, like I needed to like girls. I needed to want to get married. I needed to have children. Like that was what is the message, and especially as a male in the machismo culture, is just brutal. And I don't want to do that. I didn't want to do any of those things. And then also like growing up in Connecticut, like I had this really weird experience around being a person of color, being Latino, Spanish being my first language, and then it's spoken in the home, and then going to like schools in Connecticut, and specifically going to like a prep school for high school in Connecticut, and on scholarship and all the things, and just kind of like having to be a brown person in a sea of white is very challenging, and then the kind of identity stuff that I was facing, so it's a lot. So then I moved to New York. I realized that I can escape my home through education, and worked really hard in high school and got into Parsons School of Design. In that time, I was crazy, like trying to figure out my sexual identity, trying to figure out, like having a lot of body conscious issues, having a lot of mental health issues, but just kind of like all over the place, and managing just to graduate, right? And then like I realized that like I needed to do something because I was really unhappy. I started going to counseling, and I started like trying to figure out stuff. And I remember in one counseling session, I was like, you know what? Sometimes I just wish that I would just test HIV positive, or that I would get AIDS. I think I even maybe said that. And my therapist was like, why? And I was like, because that way, like I would have to be forced to take care of myself. Like I would be forced to actually take care of myself in a way that I'm not able to do right now. That was about maybe like 6 to 7 years before I actually tested positive. And in the interim, was this time of sexual discovery, having sex, while at the same time needing to, get really stoned or high or drunk or whatever it was in order for me to even like participate in that activity, because there was so much stuff going on in my brain. And also like really like in the sexual experimentation, like and activity, just like getting to this point like where I'd be in the middle of an act and thinking like, you deserve to get AIDS, you fucking faggot. Like that's what I was telling myself in the most intimate moments of a contact experience with another human being, right? The most vulnerable moment, that's the thought that's going through my head. So eventually, in 1998, I tested HIV positive, and that completely shifted my world. And then having to experience what I'll call like HIV AIDS trauma, because I have fallen into the AIDS category several times within my life, with living with HIV, and I'll talk about that later. But having to like deal with like the trauma of testing positive, like what that meant, like it just completely was like shattered my world, and I didn't know if I wanted to stay here on this planet, or what I was going to do. And at that point, I did have to kind of come to a reckoning with myself, and I had to like sit and like think about like either I go down this path that I'm currently on and I disintegrate, like I completely implode, or I start a different path where I try to kind of like figure out why and try to connect to a different type of life than the one I was currently in. So that shift started to happen, and I ended up going to grad school, and I got my master's in creative arts therapy. During that time in grad school, I learned about counseling, psychology, and all those different things. And so like a lot of the stuff that in terms of like my mental health started to kind of like key in. Like I was aware that I had depression. I was aware that I had generalized anxiety disorder. These were the things that I was given. Those were the diagnoses that I was given. And you know, in the learning of those things and learning how to be with other human beings, like that was super helpful. And I started to kind of think about who I was in those terms. I then graduated from Hofstra University and flew down to Miami. My best friend had also graduated from Hofstra several years before me, and she had gotten a job working for Miami-Dade County Public Schools as an art therapist. And so I was now an art therapist, so I flew down and did the same thing. And I had like what's up, you know, most people would say was super successful. Like I got there, I was in the department, I got the job, I was in the department doing really good work. I was chairperson of the department for several years. And then on the side, I had a private practice where I was doing clinical art therapy with families, couples, and relationship. And I was making really good money, had a beautiful apartment, was part of this amazing spiritual community. Like I had all the things. But at the end of the time that I was there, about 4 years before I left, I fell into this kind of black hole that I just couldn't get out of, and I kept falling like deeper and deeper into it. And I started sleeping a lot, and by the end of that, like I was like sleeping about like 22 hours, getting up, eating something, and going back to bed. And at one point, like my spiritual teacher at the Kabbalah Center, he asked me like, do you realize you're sleeping your life away? And I said, yeah, no, well, it's not really. I mean, like, I feel like my sleep life or my dream life is far more fulfilling than my real life. And that was really difficult for him to hear. Meanwhile, at school, like everything, you know, like I'm not, kind of in the closet because it's, you know, in the South, and no one really, I'm not walking around with like, you know, like, yay. But at the same time, I'm not really hiding it. But the HIV stuff, I was like super scared of anyone finding out. And so last few years just started deteriorating, not doing really well. And I started praying to God, and I was like, please, you know, like show me a way. Like I don't know what to do. I've given up. I don't want to be here anymore. And will you please show me what to do? Give me a sign. And all of a sudden I started getting these like signs for like Portland, Oregon. And I'm like, Portland, Oregon, like why Portland, Oregon? I've never been to Portland, Oregon. I don't know anyone in Portland, Oregon. It is so far from where I am, like Portland, Oregon. And it just kept coming and coming and coming. And then finally I was like, okay, that's it. I got to go. I packed up a 20-foot truck with a car behind me on a trailer and drove cross country. Landed in complete crisis after a 10-day drive of like just not sleeping and anxiety, unable to eat, you know. And then like finally getting an appointment at Cascade AIDS Project in Portland for services because I was in deep crisis. In that intake, someone said to me, the person that was doing it said to me, hey, oh my God, there's a job here. You'd be perfect for it. And I was like, what job is that? And they were like, peer support specialist. And I was like, what's that? And they explained what peer support specialist was. And I'd never heard of it before, which was kind of weird because I worked in mental health. So I figured I'd know that work, but I hadn't. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go for it. You know, like they put me in the Bridges to Work program, helped me do all the applications, all the things. They really supported me in getting this job. And about a month later in February, I started working as a peer support specialist. And that had been like it's a career change, obviously, like, you know, crazy, like went like lost like, you know, significant salary drop. And so I get the job and they send me to MHAO for training along with two other folks that are still in the peer world. And in that training for peer wellness specialists, like the second day of class, they were like going around the room and they were asking everyone to kind of like talk about what recovery space that they identified as in being in, and just kind of share a little bit about their story. And so as they were going around the table, I just kept thinking like, oh my God, what am I going to say? Like, what am I going to say? Like, I don't know what I'm going to say. And then like all of a sudden, like I was listening to people that were talking about being in mental health recovery. And several people were identifying as mental health recovery. And then I was like listening to their stories and I was like, oh my God, I'm in mental health recovery. And that like just awareness just kind of like opened my mind up in a way that I hadn't thought about any of my life before. And like these like layers of cement just kind of lifted off me magically, and like, well, not magically, but just through this awareness. And it made sense. Like I didn't understand before why Mr. Ventura's life was doing so well, but Yehoshua's life was like a hot mess. Like I never was able to have that kind of be in a shared space. And all of a sudden, thinking about mental health recovery and being in mental health recovery, I was like, oh my God, like that makes sense now. Like, now I get why. And then working at Cascade AIDS Project, or CAP, they have a strong emphasis on trauma-informed care. And so like I was just like taking trauma-informed care after trauma-informed care like class. And it just like, it made everything make sense. I started realizing that I was not necessarily depressed, and I was not necessarily generalized anxiety, but that actually what I was suffering was from PTSD. And being where I live now, I was able to access some amazing, and I do access clinical care from Quest, Cindy Marino, shout out, amazing therapist. And she really helped me kind of like change my diagnosis, because everywhere in my paperwork, whether it's medical or mental health, it was like, these two things. And she was able to get me to to have PTSD be my main diagnosis, because from there, I'm able to work in a different way. I'm able to work with different types of therapeutic interventions. I'm also allowed to kind of access a whole different type of medication that has been really helpful for me. And with that shift of awareness, I was just like, wow, and with that support, like things were getting better. I was also receiving peer support work from Quest as well, with Bo, who's now at the state. Shout out to Bo. And he just taught me, like, I think the best lesson that he ever taught me was like, the shoe's always going to drop. The other shoe's always going to drop. But like, let's look at your life and since you got here, and how many times the shoes dropped. And A, you've made it through. And two, let's look at who's around you to help you get through it. And three, that you're here. And so thinking about that and always kind of being present in like, there's never going to be a perfect life. The shoe's always going to drop. It's going to be okay. I'm going to make it through. That's very powerful. And that's what that peer work came from. And then also just being able to be in a space of acknowledging and being able to understand my own trauma. It's like really, it's been a really incredible experience. And this is from a job that I had no idea this was going to happen. And then I ended up moving to the Southwest Washington office. In the Southwest Washington office, like they're connected to the Department of Health. I'm still living in Portland, but I'm traveling over there. And we're providing peer services for the first time in Washington, which is super amazing. And there it's called peer navigation. And the state of Washington had just created this program. And so I moved up there, got the job, crushed it, was having an amazing time, was doing amazing work, creating a lot of community programming, just like really having a great time working with an amazing team. And they appreciated me, I appreciated them, and they always supported me in any of the things that I was doing for the community and in my work. So it was like amazing. And then all of a sudden this job at the state comes along, and like I was like, I don't want to leave. Like, I'm good. Like, I'm already on a trajectory. Like, they already said I'm going to be like manager, like all these types of things. And I'm like, no. But then like several people just kind of reached out to me and wanted to make sure that I took advantage of this opportunity, because this opportunity is that now I'm working for Washington State. And I get to do a bunch of work that on a statewide level with peer work and peers that has never been done before in the state. And so this is what peer work can do. This is what it can lead you to. And I'll tell you that the moment of like recognition happened for me a few years ago in 2019, where I was in New York City for a friend's wedding, and I was hanging out in Brooklyn with another friend of mine, and we were driving down the street, and all of a sudden we stop at a stoplight, and I look over and I see this building, and I'm like, oh my God. My friend Reina was like, what's up? And I was like, that building, you see that building? You see that building? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, that's the building where I tested positive in 1998. And then she was like, oh my God. I was like, oh my God, totally. And then like to think like, like look at where I am now. I'm doing this amazing work. I've discovered all these things, and like I'm healing, and I'm doing this amazing work. And it's because of that moment that at that point I felt was the worst moment in my life. So now being sitting into my reality and being like, I am fucking living my life now, it meant all the world to me, because it just kind of like made me shift around, my narrative, right? Like no longer do I have to be that person. And I haven't been that person for a really long time. And in working in the Southwest Washington office, they had me work on the Stigma Project. And in the Stigma Project, I was constantly speaking publicly around my story, like the story that you just heard, and around my status. And having to go through that over and over again, being on Facebook, having my friends and family all find out through that social media instead of through me, and all of a sudden I'm exposed, and having to like navigate those waters, right? And time after time with this amazing crew that I was working with at CAP, like they just helped me get through it, until one day I realized, I was like, oh my God, that's it. That's why I had given up in Miami. I hadn't realized that the reason that I'd given up in Miami, and I still am having a hard time like understanding it, but was that the reason I had given up in Miami was because of me being in the closet around my status. I didn't feel any really comfortable talking to anyone in my community around me living with HIV, other than like a few close friends. And I hadn't realized that like imprisonment of shame and guilt and self-hatred around, living with HIV or having HIV, just like was shutting me down to this point where I didn't want to be here anymore. And I didn't even realize how important that was. I didn't realize how important it was for me to be okay with living with HIV, and not just okay, but understand that it's part of my life now, and then I can move forward, and there are things that I can do to take care of myself, and that this is not a death sentence anymore. And like this realization around all these things, and being at this point that here I am at this building, seeing this space, just kind of marking like we can heal, we can close these loops of trauma, we can close these loops of intergenerational trauma in the work that we're doing. So that's another thing that I just want to say, like it's so special for us to be peer navigators, because we get to do this kind of work with people. So this is me with a little compass in my hand, peer navigation. All right. So I think it's probably too small on the screen, so I'm going to read it for you. This is so as I move into Washington and I'm doing peer navigation work, the word navigation meant something to me. I'm a lover of words, and so I get hooked on words. And so the fact that navigation or navigator was in my job title, I started going really deep into that word and what it meant. And I really thought about it, because it's so like it's such a nice way to think about how the journey of the human life is in the peers that we're working with, right? We're all on a journey, we're on a path, we're all navigating different types of terrain. And the rocky terrain could be like disruption, mental health, substance misuse, like, or houselessness, or it could be like mountains, or it could be holes, all these different things, or in waters, it's like the different types of currents that we have to navigate all the time. And how do we keep ourselves going when the current's taking us away? All these different things that were about navigation. And I also was a Boy Scout as a kid. So like camping and all this kind of stuff was like, I like this stuff. And so like I started like really getting involved in that and thinking about compasses and trying to bring that idea into the work as a peer navigator. Thinking about like, what this is what we're doing. We're helping the peer clients that we're working with navigate their lives. And so I found this poem, and it's by Kipling, and it's called The Explorer. I'm going to read it. There's no sense in going further. It's the edge of cultivation. So they said, and I believed it. Broke my land and sowed my crop, built my barns and strung my fences in the litter border station, tucked away below the foothills where the trails run out and stop. Till a voice as bad as conscience rang interminable changes on one everlasting whisper, day and night repeated so. Something hidden. Go and find it. Go and look behind the ranges. something lost behind the ranges, lost and waiting for you. Go. That poem makes me think about the work that we do as peers. That poem makes me think about how we're constantly going in this exploration of the hidden and really working with our peer clients to help them find that hidden, right? To help them find those pieces of themselves that maybe haven't been connected, and those pieces that really could help that peer client to make a different choice and to make a choice that may kind of make their lives be happier, healthier, in wellness, or whatever goal they may have, right? So just that's where I'm coming from with the peer navigation. So you're going to hear a little bit about that theme as we go throughout. But now I'm going to talk about, let's see, who we are. We are a community of people living with HIV or AIDS. I'm going to give a very brief synopsis around HIV. In front of you, you see an image with a red blood cell and a white cell, and that cell is called a T cell and is part of our immune system. Here is an HIV cell. You can see it's got all these little prickly things and little circles on the top of it, at the end of it. And what happens is that here is a T cell, a healthy T cell. The HIV virus, with those little spiky things, connects to the cell, enters in through the membrane, goes into the nucleus, and takes over the DNA of the nucleus. And so the white cell stops producing itself. Instead, it produces HIV cells. The cell dies eventually, and then the virus, those new virus cells, go into the body, into the bloodstream. This is what you'll hear be called viral load, the amount of virus that can be measured within a certain amount of blood. Now, because of modern medicine, we have antiretroviral therapy, which is a combination of different medications that protect the white blood cells within our system, both on the membrane level, within the cell level, and also within the nucleus. So there are 3 different points where there are barriers created where the HIV virus cannot be in. So that, alongside with the advent of PrEP, pre-exposure prophylactics, the medication for people that are not living with HIV, that are HIV negative, that they can take if they would like to protect themselves from contracting HIV. So ART, antiretrovirals, PrEP, creates this barrier around the white blood cells, which then the HIV virus cells cannot attach, so they're left floating in the bloodstream until eventually they just die. And when they die, that means that we can live. And that means that we can live longer, we can live healthier. And we then have to learn how to live in a world that still stigmatizes us, that still views us as, like, in several spaces, view us as being biohazards or toxic. And then also the things that we have taken on within our own culture. And so the work then becomes, for us peer navigators in the state, is to really work on stigma, whether it's like external or internal, and seeing how disruptive that stigma can be to someone's quality of life. Because regardless of status, you are loved, right? And so, hey, you are loved. You see there, U equals U. I'm going to talk about that later on in the presentation, but that's a very important thing, because U equals U means undetectable equals untransmittable. So we are also able to prevent infection of other people if we are able to maintain a undetectable viral load. Okay. So before I go there, I'm just going to review. The viral load is, like I said, the number of virus cells that can be measured within a quantity of blood. And your T cells are the white blood cells, and those are counted in terms of like how your immune system is doing. Anything below 200, you're categorized as AIDS. And that means your immune system is compromised to the level that you're going to need like help with antibiotics so that you don't get things that could become lethal even because of your low immune system. And then generally when you're on medication and you're compliant, you are able, or you're participatory in it, you are able to maintain undetectable viral load. And once you maintain that for several months, you are able then to understand that you are not able to transmit the virus via blood or sexual contact. That is a big win for us. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about our program. Peer navigation comes from the world of peer support, as you are all peer support specialists. I do not have to explain what that means in the way that I normally do, but essentially the idea that we're all in recovery in different spaces. And as we all know, I love this image because the idea like recovery is not linear. We go through loops and cycles and we keep going through the different things that we do until we get to places where we feel like we're in that space of recovery. Being recovered, is that a possibility? I think we all have to evolve and change and move and do the things that we need to do to stay in recovery. And that is a relationship that we have with ourselves. HIV AIDS recovery, I've kind of like talked about that term, or I use that term sometimes because I think it's very specific. I think that the experience of testing HIV positive and going through that stigma piece, and then also the mental health and substance stuff that can also be in there. It's like, and trauma. There's a lot of stuff that comes into this experience, which is really unique to the HIV AIDS experience. So I kind of talk about that. And then we go to peer navigators. Peer navigators are is what Washington State calls peer support specialists or peer wellness specialists. We have 9 programs across the state, 12 active peer navigators, and then we also have 3 open positions right now, one at the Department of Corrections, one in Pierce County, and another one in Seattle at Antiretroviral, and they're looking for a bilingual peer. So if you all know anybody, shout out. And then for us, these are the things that like I've been able to put into the community services manual. But peer navigators are often and preferably living with HIV, medication adherent role models, living with a shared experience, as well as a shared community membership with the populations they work with or in. Shared similarities may mean peer navigators are of a similar gender identity, sexual orientation, faith, socioeconomic level, racial, ethnic identity, or speak the same language as clients. A peer navigator is a human being with strengths, weaknesses, struggles, successes, and someone who is living with the impact of HIV every day. So I think that is one of the most important caveats that we have as peer navigators, is that the majority of us are living with HIV. And then those that aren't have really qualified shared lived experience in it, whether they have partners that live with HIV or have been in the community for a substantial amount of time. We've got some really great people out there. But that is the caveat of our work, because it creates a different type of opening for our folks when our clients, when they want to talk to us about not wanting to take their meds, like being in a space where they don't want to take their meds, and they're like, I don't want to fucking take my meds, and I'm like, yeah, I get it. Sometimes I don't want to fucking take my meds too, and then like also like being like, I'm having a hard time, I'm missing doses, and then like me saying like, hey, yeah, I'm missing doses too, like but what I've found, if I get my meds bubble packed, then like I can see, like, it helps me to remember to take them, and then also I can see what doses I've missed, which is also helpful when I see my doctor. Have you ever thought about bubble packing? And so like being able to use my experience and in that same journey, with them in that way is different, right? I'm not their case manager. I can share parts of my life and how I've navigated those parts of my life. And then like, oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Where was I? Someone? Okay, shared lived experience. Got it, yeah, shared lived experiences, thank you. And then, so like being able to use a shared lived experience as a way to speak to them creates a vulnerability, a level of vulnerability that they won't necessarily have with their case managers. The other thing that I'm constantly talking about is the power dynamic difference, right? Because case managers have a different power dynamic with our clients. Like case managers give them bus passes, possibly food vouchers or cards. They control connections to housing subsidies and like different things like that. So there's a space between where the peer client is and then where the case manager is. But with the peer navigator, the space is different because we are sharing our life experiences. We know a lot of the things that they're doing. We know the depression that can come around living with HIV. We know what it's like to struggle with stigma, internal or external. We know what it's like to be challenged in a way of thinking about mortality that other people don't have to think about. We know what it's like to have to take a handful of medicine every day just to keep going. And at the same time, having that reminder every day, or you're able to shift it to thinking of like, no, this is something that's going to keep me going. I've got things to do, jobs to do. So I think that's a really wonderful thing about our program because, like I said, there are very few programs in this country that are like this. There's one in Georgia, in Atlanta, which is amazing. And then there's another one in New York City, which is also super cool, where they're really putting forth HIV, people living with HIV, like wanting to provide them with job opportunities and using this as a way to just not only give a job and training, but also then, having these people that can create community and kind of have that, keep going, community and jobs and being able to show other people that you can live with HIV and still hold down a job. You're able to have career growth in that job. You're able to have healthy friendships. You're able to pay your bills. You're able to do all the things that other people do, and that you can do it too. So, so that's what we're pushing for in our program. What our motto is. The training piece is something that's kind of in the works right now. I'm able to now coordinate for the first time ever, training for the peer navigators across the state. We're working with Intentional Peer Support, which is an amazing program that I've trained through, and I think it's a good model to use as peers in our state. So we're coordinating that, getting that together. Hopefully in the fall, around September, November, we'll be doing that training for everyone and the managers that they work with. I've worked with changing the label of manager of a peer navigator to steward of a peer navigator. I wanted to make sure that the people that were providing supervision to peer navigators understood their role in working with a peer navigator, because it's not just like another case manager. It's like you're working with a person that is walking around the office with everything exposed. And that because of that, other people in the office may be experiencing similar things in their own lives, but they have the choice of whether they say it or not. A peer is literally paid to disclose these vulnerabilities. And so if you're a person that's working with them, you have to understand that and keep that in the forefront of your mind so that you're providing the best type of supervision that you can to those people, considering that we don't want peer navigators to get burnt out. We have to be careful around peer navigators being triggered and being dysregulated. And we want to make sure we want to support our peer navigators in maintaining their recovery space or maintaining their wellness so that they can continue to do the work. Because as you know, this work is really hard sometimes, and it can take a lot of you out of you sometimes, and it breaks our heart sometimes. And so we need to be able to look at that. How can I do this in a sustainable way? What can I change around the work that I'm doing so I can make it sustainable, so that I'm not so greatly impacted or suffering from the work that I'm doing, because I don't want to suffer. I have already suffered, right? But the training to do intentional peer support is super exciting, because that, like I said, I think is going to be a really good model for us to incorporate into our general work. And then in order to receive peer navigation services, you would be a client at any of the agencies in Washington State. You would work with a case manager. You would have to have a peer navigation program in your agency though, and there are only 9. So that's not a lot. And so referral would come from a case manager. If appropriate, the case manager discusses it with the peer navigator. And then there's a lot of collaborative meetings that happen at that point, where the referral, the person who's being referred, the case manager and the peer navigator should meet, talk about what the services are, talk about what expectations are for both people as the peer navigator and the client, because the client is expected to participate and be active in the participation. And then the peer navigator then will meet with the client afterwards, do an initial, and then start the work. You know, timing is a big thing. The question that I get often is, you know, how long do people receive peer navigation services? Or also the opposite is like, you know, we need to, you know, lower this person's caseload. They've got too many people, or, you know, we need them to turn over because we need more people. They need to be able to see more people. And my response to that is like, if you've got that high of a need, you need to hire another peer navigator. But that's just me. Oh, the other thing that I'm working on in terms of shared lived experience is this idea that like shared lived experience has value. That is the magic of our work, but that is the value of our work. And the one thing that I'm really striving and working towards is making sure there's equity in salary around that. A lot of our peer navigators across the state do not get paid a wage similar to a case manager. And the reason being is because the case manager has higher education attached to their resume. And right now, lived experience is not being viewed as the same. And I think it should be, because as peer navigators or peer workers, you know, we're out there hustling our asses all the fucking time. And we're working real hard, you know what I mean? And so it's important for us to be compensated also just to keep our mental health, and we're able to like live, you know, may our salaries be sustainable so that we can be sustainable. So then the work can either be individual, it can be in group, it can be community focused. But the main thing that we talk about as peer navigators is that we are connectors. We're constantly connecting our clients to our peer clients to their housing case manager or their case manager, because a lot of times, as you know, your peers will start to call you all the time, and they're going to call you for everything. And so it's going to be important for you to be like seeing where those opportunities to make those connections are. It's like, oh, really? That's happening for you with your insurance? Oh, you couldn't get your meds? Oh, that sucks. Like, have you told your case manager about that? No? Okay, so maybe you want to, because they're in charge of, you know, they do all the insurance stuff and they can help you out with that. They can also probably call the pharmacy and help you with that. So you may want to give them a call. Do you need support in that? Or, you know, like housing, like, you know, the same thing with housing, like, hey, like, you know, like, is there anything that you need to make sure that your housing, you don't lose your housing subsidy? Like, what's going on? Like these different support things that we can do, and saying like, okay, maybe you want to talk to your housing case manager and bring the housing case manager in. As a peer navigator, I'm always trying to participate in as much as possible with the team. So if the client's coming in, I want to join that meeting with the case manager, at least to just check in. If it's a home visit that the housing case manager is doing, I like to tag along and be in there, because it just also makes the peer generally feel more comfortable. But this idea that as a team, you know, and that includes the client, we are all accountable for participating in the work. And when we do that, that means that the load is lessened for one individual. And then that means that with that team, it is a lighter load for everybody. And then it's more people that can come and support when we need it. So peer navigators are connectors. And then peer navigators will generally have a caseload of 15 to 20. Priority is given to those clients who are newly diagnosed, out of care, and or non-virally suppressed. That's an important piece, because you know, the best practices say that 15 to 20 clients is a manageable caseload. And sometimes if you go past that, then your ability to do a solid job starts to get a little shaky, especially if you got several peers that are in spaces that are a little bit more needing of your energy and support. But at the same time, we always kind of keep like a few empty spaces on our caseload just in case we get a person that tests, a newly diagnosed person that tests positive, so that we can help them in those initial meetings. We can support them in going to those initial doctor's appointments and kind of explaining like what's going on and being there to listen and support them in whatever connections that they need in that initial process. So that is also a really unique thing. I was doing that for one client, and he was sitting there and I was looking at it and I was just thinking like, dang, like, thank God I'm here. Like this poor guy's got all these things going on, and like, God, like if only he had like, thank God I'm here. And then all of a sudden he turns around and he looks at me, he's like, thank God you're here. And I was like, I know. And you know, this idea of like being able to be in that moment with someone that's in that moment, that's so terrifying. that's just like you just gotten this news that you're HIV positive and the world shifts, right? And for him, there was a lot of cultural issues that he had to remain in the closet around that, so it was like really, really challenging for him to go through this experience and not be able to reach out to anyone. No one could know about his status. And, I was that one person that was able to be there in that initial process and see them and connect them to case management and get them solidly grounded in the next steps, to help them in the next steps on their journey. Full-time peer navigators have the 15 to 20 clients. I asterisk that because if you go below that, I feel that it's really important to not expect a part-time employee to manage the same type of full caseload as a full-time employee, because you're not getting paid the same and you don't have that kind of bandwidth or capacity. In response to COVID, peer work has been something that's been really challenging because what we used to do is our one-on-ones we no longer could do. We've had moments where we've been able to do it in the office and spaces where like social distancing, precautionary measures were taken with masks and shields, but it's caused a great deal of interruption within the service delivery, and also like a lot of times we're not able to go to doctor's appointments or any of the other appointments that a peer navigator generally would need support with, because also sometimes we're transportation, as you know. And so if we can't put them in our cars, that creates more barriers. So it's created some barriers. Other barriers I would say is technology, because a lot of folks, they don't have the technology to access virtual appointments, or, we have to consider their income and their broadband and all the things, their wireless, all that, that costs money, and we need to make sure that we're not putting them in harm or danger in having to use that. So those things have been super, super hard on the work. Also, the isolation that a lot of our clients experience or our peers experience has gotten intensified because of the shutdowns, because of having to be inside, because of the lack of human contact. What has already been a very hard and challenging dynamic within our community has become increased and more of an issue right now. But luckily, things are changing. So, we're starting to see some things. Another thing that just happened, which I'm super proud of, is that one of our peer navigators, George Fine up in Kitsap, created a community garden. It's called the Gnome Project. And this community garden was planted in a way where like people could be in there and still be like 6 feet apart. And there's like a seating area in the garden where like if you're wearing PPE, you're still socially distanced enough where you can like be there and actually converse with another person. And for that community up there that's pretty much been sheltered this entire time, like now they're able to come out, still be safe, but be in community. Even if no one else is in the garden but one person, that person doing that gardening is contributing to the community garden. And the great thing is that the food that's going to be grown there is going to be used in their red ribbon dinners. So it's a win-win. So that's another way that we've responded to the COVID, is to try to figure out new and innovative ways to reach clients and to provide services in different ways that are out of the box. So that's been our thing. I am now going to talk about our initiatives. Under my role as a peer navigation consultant, I have a couple of things that I'm responsible for specifically outside of just peer navigation. One is I am entrusted with the 50+ category or group. The majority of people living with HIV at this point in our country, the majority of them are actually 50 years or older. And this is a very unique dynamic that's important for you to understand if you're working with folks in this range, because these are folks that tested at a time generally that they were told that they were not going to live. Many of us made plans. I tested in '98, and so like I was told, go write a will to stop thinking about the future by my doctor. And so many of us had to go through the experience of creating a will, not thinking long term anymore, and so we kind of, our life shifted in that way. And now all of a sudden, with the advent of new medicine and technology, we are now living longer, if not full lifespans. Again, with the advent of undetectable viral loads, we are able to not suffer the same amount of impact on our internal organs and immune system. So we are living. So this group of 50 plus folk are starting to, or have been having challenges in terms of like the intergenerational gap, the experience of like having to be in the closet, the experience of what it was like to test positive, the experience of AIDS in the 80s, and all the devastation that happened in that period of time. And then to still be here. And so then there's a lot of guilt around that, and also questioning in terms of what am I here for? What am I going to do? A lot of our folks are living on Social Security disability. And I don't know if you know that, what that is, but that is some low income that they're receiving. And they're supposed to make that last for their entire month. And it's just generally not enough. And so then there's the mental health pieces, right? And so in all those different factors, those intersecting points of like mental health and feeling isolated, specifically in Washington, because there's such little ability to be out and proud, other than Seattle, and perhaps Spokane or Pierce County. There's not really areas in Washington where gay culture, LGBTQIA culture is appreciated and able to be out and free. So our folks will have very isolated lives, and then living with HIV on top of it is can be even more devastating. So we're looking, and also none of the structures that have been built into the country's way of supporting people living with HIV ever thought that we were going to live this long either. So we don't have any policies yet around multi things going on with the person. We don't have policies in terms of like, I think really medication seems to be the hardest thing that we're finding. And then also just like income and subsidies and housing and all those different things, like they're very unique to this crowd. And so we have to start looking at ways to support them and also like try to bridge that gap between the 50 plus and the community of people living with HIV. So it's a big deal. And I just turned 50 in December, so I'm literally now part of that crew. And I think that's really excellent. Like I got something from AARP the month before I even turned 50. So like, this is a very unique way of looking at living with HIV. And it's all about expanding the quality of life, right? So one of the initiatives that we have is from the 50 plus area are having peer navigators that are able to work as peer navigators, but work only a certain number of hours within the week and the month so that they are able to maintain receiving their Social Security disability. We have 2 peer navigators in Spokane. Each of them work 10 hours a week. And because of the 10 hours and the way that they're working throughout the month, they're able to maintain Social Security disability, but at the same time have a small income and also give back to the community. So this is a project that we're really working and focusing on. I think if we can provide more opportunities for our 50 plus community to work as peer navigators, I think it will give them a purpose, it will give them income, and it will also give them an opportunity to build and be part of a growing community of peers so that the communities can start to support each other, and the infrastructure of support within that community amongst the peers will really be a powerful force and be a powerful force that can do amazing things. So that is our 50 plus initiative that we're working on. And right now we have 2. So I'm super excited about that. Woohoo! Then the second initiative that we have is in prevention. And this is something that I want to kind of like emphasize in that when talking about prevention, the majority of things that you hear around prevention are condoms, and then afterwards is PrEP. And that's pretty much it. The prevention world has focused primarily on those 2 things and has given all the energy into PrEP and condom use. That is great, but I would like to say that there are other ways of supporting prevention. And as a community of HIV, people living with HIV, we can do it by maintaining our viral loads at undetectable. Because when I'm undetectable, that means I cannot transmit it. It's untransmittable. My HIV is untransmittable to another person. And so that prevents the other person from getting HIV. That is called prevention. Prevention in action. And the leader of this movement, Bruce Richmond, who's an amazing person, is spreading this word across the world. Really, like in Africa and like Poland and like all these like different crazy places, he's spreading the U equals U science, and because it's proven that we cannot transmit the virus. And so that also alleviates us, right? Because I think as people living with HIV, having relationships with people that are not, there's always that weird thing that's going in your mind. I don't want to infect them. I don't want to infect them. I don't want to infect them. And that can be a really debilitating dynamic within a relationship. But in this like zero discordant relationship, if one person is taking PrEP and the other person is undetectable, there's no ability for HIV to be transmitted. And so that relationship, the balance of it is much better because you're able to have ownness of your own care. You're not having to take care of yourself for two people. So the U equals U is great for promoting this, and no one knows about it because everyone wants to stick to condom use. Everyone is afraid that if we start saying U equals U, people aren't going to use condoms. A lot of people aren't using condoms anyway. And so, there's PrEP, there's all these like, different things, and people's choice around what safe sex is different. And I think it's important to value that and validate that. Because everyone should have agency in terms of and consent in terms of how they practice and what they do to keep themselves and their partners safe. So in the advent of U equals U, when I initially heard of this movement or this campaign, I had a hard time with it because I thought not everyone is going to be able to achieve undetectable. Undetectable is a very specific, it requires a lot of things, a lot of needs to be met, whether it's housing, income, nutrition, mental health, substance use, like all those different things need to be considered in order to really think about how can someone achieve undetectable? Because undetectable means that you need to take your meds every day and that you need to be doing all the things you need to be doing to maintain your health, get your blood drawn regularly, and that takes work. And that takes a certain grounding, and those things that I mentioned before are part of what's necessary for that grounding in order to achieve undetectable status. So in my conflict with that, I was in a meeting at work, and one of my coworkers yelled out over the cubicle, "Viral load does not equal value." And that phrase just kind of alleviated all the things for me. And I was like, yes, viral load does not equal value. Marisa, she gave it to me, amazing. And so in our promotion around U equals U, we also promoted viral load does not equal value because we wanted to be respectful of the people in our community that were not going to achieve undetectable. And we were not going to create another way for a sub-segment of our community to be isolated or stigmatized because of that ability, right? So we started this campaign, and then Bruce ended up finding it, and he now teaches it as part of his global campaign. And so he always gives us credit for that, and we're always excited about that. And then the idea that long-term survivors is a term that you'll hear amongst people that have been living with HIV for since that are over 50 or for a considerable long time. That is a term that some people like. There's some people that don't like. I see it as thinking as we are more than surviving at this point, and I think now the shift is how do we shift from surviving to living? And then as peer navigators, how do we support our clients in going from living and shifting from living to thriving in whatever areas they want? And now that we have U equals U, now that we have this longevity, and we are starting to look at this work differently, right? We're looking at wanting to provide our clients with a level of support that really helps them and models, how to be within a meeting, how to communicate with a doctor, how to get your needs met, and also how to navigate those really difficult challenges and barriers that happen in our lives, and still be able to keep going and keep growing. one of the other initiatives that I am in charge of is that U equals U campaign for our state. And for us, that specifically is our website, which is iamnotarisk.org. So iamnotarisk.org is our website where we're really sending a message, trying to share the U equals U message, but at the same time, like putting that message that I am not a risk, right? Because always people look at us in a certain way as a person living with HIV. And when we disclose that, the responses that we get can be very challenging sometimes and upsetting. And so to start to try to shift that narrative, we are really trying to ask the public to understand that we are not risks. And the amazing thing is that in this picture, there's two peer navigators, George up in Kitsap, that's the person who did the garden. And then down in the corner, I think it's your left-hand side, is Gilbert, and he is amazing. He works at the Department of Corrections. He's got a shared experience of being incarcerated and also living with HIV. So the work that he's doing in terms of getting people when they're still incarcerated and helping them transition to support outside when they get released, amazing. And then, so this is what we're doing as a kind of like a public campaign. I get to start working with this. I plan on, once we're able to actually go and visit sites, I would like to go around the state and take pictures of all the peer navigators, and if they're up for it, be on the website. I want to have more of a kind of like really showing them in their own lives, not and really kind of giving an opportunity for the peer navigators to express themselves, because most of my folks here were not happy with their pictures, and I can understand why. But that is what one of the other initiatives that we have is. So the idea that I am not a risk is a theme that we also want to empower our community of people living with HIV to consider as we move forward in this, and as our lives change, as the epidemic changes, as we start to think about COVID and what that experience has been like. A lot of our folks have talked about feeling triggered around their HIV experience or testing positive because of COVID and having to be isolated and that. And then also a lot of them have felt a lot of folks have felt a lot of pride or all of a sudden just like a good feeling around that, like finally other people know what it's like for me. Finally, other people know what it's like that they can't leave their house, they can't go out and meet their friends for dinner. Finally, they know what that feels like. They know how frustrating that feels like. Finally, they know how lonely it feels like to have to be in your house all the time because you don't have money to go out. Now they just can't go out because they can't go out. But now they know what that feels like. And that's so important because it connects to the idea of peer work. I think a lot of our folks, all of us that are living with HIV and that have gone through this, like there's something that we have that we just understand in terms of mortality that's different. We've had to engage the idea of mortality for ourselves. And we've had to make peace with that part in some way in order to continue living. And then so I think for us, having this awareness around our mortality and then having something like as threatening as COVID happen, like we've earned our chops and we're here. We know how to do this. We can do this. And we are doing it. And if we're not hearing a lot of things around HIV and COVID, there aren't, we're not seeing people that are living with HIV being like, impacted in some sort of disproportionate way. And so that's showing our health and our resilience. And I think it's important as peers to think about that. I'm hoping that, like, I know a lot of you here are working with people living with HIV. And for those that I don't know, I'm hoping that like you're thinking about clients that you may be working with. I think it's always really interesting that, in peer work, why are y'all having conversations like this? Like if you're in a different field, whether it's mental health or if it's substance misuse or trauma, You know, are you asking folks, are they having conversations with you? Are they just sharing with you that they're living with HIV? And then, you know, I'm hoping that this lecture will, or workshop will, give you an idea or some thinking points in terms of what you can do with those clients, to talk about these things. You know what I mean? Like, if you're working with them, do they know what U equals U is? You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people, this is the first time you're going to be hearing this, and it's important for you to share that news, and that information. And so just thinking about, like, how can you take this, the things that I'm talking about and presenting to you, um, back to the work that you're doing with your client and your peer clients. So I'm going to, that is iamnotarisk.org. And the thing about working where I was working at CAP and working with this amazing woman named Sarah Atkins, and her kind of like supporting me in those stigma projects that we were doing, she taught me a lot. She taught me a lot about power. She taught me a lot about how to fight, how to get a message out, how to stand up for people that aren't able to stand up, how to be a voice for people that aren't able to verbalize what their experiences are. And in that, I found this amazing sense of pride in being an activista and in who I am as a person living with HIV, who is Latino, who is queer, and all the different things that make me who I am. And now being able to be at the statewide level where I can work with peers is amazing. So what I do with the peer navigators in the state is super cool. I get to meet with them regularly in what I call co-reflections, which is an IPS tool, an intentional peer support tool. And in those meetings, we get to talk about how the work is going and how they're doing. This is super important because that way, again, if there's some dysregulation or some upset or some trigger that may be happening in the work, hopefully we can talk about it and find resources of support and work to get them to, you know, to get the peer navigators to remain sustainable. The other thing is that I am also working with their stewards and trying to meet with them regularly to also talk about how is it going for them in their supervision of a peer navigator. Are there things that they're challenging with? Do they need technical support in any sort of way that I could provide in terms of how to support your peer navigator and the program? And so that is more of like the programmatic stuff that I get to do. As you heard me earlier state that I got a lot of that stuff into the community service manual. So we just updated the community service manual for HIV community service providers across the state. And I got to put in a pretty beefy section of what peer navigation is and all of those things to really kind of like work on having everyone understand what peer navigators do. Again, to raise that equity of importance and to try to diminish that hierarchical capitalistic system that we exist in. And I think that also just thinking about the fact that, like, at one point in my life, I was negative, then I tested positive, and then I went through all these different things in my life that were just like crazy and like things where I had to make choices and, you know, having to get to places where, like, you know, I really was struggling to remain present and on this planet to a moment and being able to sit here as a peer to all you who are peers and be in a place where I'm making a bomb ass salary, where I'm not worried about paying my bills paycheck to paycheck like I had been until this position, and living a lifestyle which I've never had before, and also being able to have power, being able to say things to people in my department, and they have to listen. that's new for me. I mean, like I was the chairperson for the art therapy department, but this is like different. So the power that I'm experiencing is really odd. I am blessed to be in a very wonderfully multicultural team, an HIV community services team. A lot of BIPOC folk on our team. And that's really important because in the state, it's very white and the organization itself is very white. So, you know, in that speech of activism, we're also talking about ethnicity and equity in that way. And so to be able to be part of this team that's really working for that is super important for me. So I will end my talk to give a little bit of time for questions and answers. But before I end, I will read one last thing for you. I found this poem through a friend of mine. It's called Only Only by Adrian Michael. And I feel like this is what I just want to, this is the message that I want to say to all y'all, to all peer navigators, to all peer support professionals, to all peers out there. You are the one, the only, the expectation and the expected, the sure and the certain, the root and the sun. You pull and lure and hold and ease and open, you open, you open, you open, you. Oh, you aren't just anyone, not one other soul, no matter how hard they try, can deep like you, empath like you, gift like you, gorgeous like you, humble like you, create like you, love like you, attract like you, heal like you, energy like you. You are the one, the only one. That's it, y'all. That's my presentation.
All right, thank you so much, Yehoshua. We open up this, we've got about 15 minutes left for questions or comments.
Were there any questions that came up in the chat?
No, not at this time.
I was really curious to hear more about the gnome garden. Is there a website for that, or any more info on that somewhere?
We're working on that. So George called it the gnome project. We're trying to get him a gnome. And because I was like, what kind of gnome do you have? And he's like, we couldn't afford to get a gnome. So we're trying to get him a gnome from the state to show support. I reached out to the company who's making the gnomes and trying to see if they would kind of sign on as wanting to support the project. George is kind of putting together what he did in Kitsap to share out with the other peer navigators in case they're interested in starting to do something like that in their agencies. So it would be about, they found a plot of land within the community garden. They were able to use some funds from their agency to, buy the things, plot it out. They did all the measurement around like, how far people could be, 6 foot, like all the social distancing. So they really created the garden to take that into account. And then they created a seating area in the middle, again, with social distancing so that people could be there and chat with each other, because in that community, like a lot of those folks have been inside and they haven't really come outside very much. So it's scary for them. And this is giving them outdoors, wind, so they're feeling a little safer in order to be together. And that's been important because of the social isolation piece and all the damage that's done. So we're going to send that out.
Where did they get the land to make a community garden?
I think there are usually community gardens in like different neighborhoods. So like throughout Portland and Washington, there are community gardens. So they would just find one that would be closest to the space. And then also the other thing is that George now can meet with his peers there. That removes that barrier because there's social distance. He can have his meetings there, and it's like a win-win.
I'd just like to really thank you, Yehoshua, for the presentation, for sharing your truths and sharing your story. And when I first started working at CAP, you were the first person that I shadowed, and it's such a great opportunity for me. And I just really admired the way that you communicated with the client, and I could see the appreciation and the gratitude and just the affinity the client had towards you. And your presentation was very inspiring, and once again renewed my hope and my journey. And I just really appreciate hearing everything you had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. If it's okay, can I share a little bit about us as well? Like, it had been a wonderful merit to watch you come into the position, and then you come out and shadow me, because that was like very soon when you first started, and I remember the look on your face, and then like seeing you grow and shift through the work, through the fears of, am I doing a good job? 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 And like for you to finally start finding a grounding in understanding that you being you is doing a good job, and that you being you has been able to help and support other people within your community. And because of your story and your ability to be where you're at, you're able to provide them with some amazing support. And I saw that shift in the look in your face from when you first started to when I left CAP. And I saw someone who was sure and grounded in the work that they were doing, and that there was no longer that fear. And it was really wonderful to watch that of you. And we've got two new peer navigators from CAP right now in Southwest Washington with Troy and Baby online. And they're part of our crew, which is super exciting. So thank you all for coming. Thank you. All right, Jesse, I think if there aren't any more questions, we can end the session.
All right. Everyone, please check your email after this. You will get a survey if you would like to take the time to complete that survey, so that we can get your feedback. We would greatly appreciate it. And thank you all for being here, and we'll see you later on during the conference.
Bye. Hi,
Thank
Laura.
you, Yehoshua.
Bye. Thank you, Jesse.
Great to see you.
Great to see you too.